All right. Thanks for tuning in to the Sheet Metal Shaping Podcast, where we discuss the pursuit of sheet metal shaping through traditional coach building techniques. My guest today on the show is Nick Cologero of Catskill Mountain Customs. My man, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ryan. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on. It's funny for the people who don't know what's happening behind the scenes. We had an internet connection issue a couple times now. So Nick is sitting on his router, and I have plugged in directly to the router with a 100-foot cord. So we should be good to roll for this episode. Again, thanks for being here. This is a ton of fun. Tell the folks a bit about yourself.
My name's Nick. I run Catskill Mountain Customs here in upstate New York. I run that part-time. Full-time, I'm a career firefighter. But with Catskill Mountain Customs, my primary focus is sheet metal shaping. I started out doing custom motorcycles and general fab, but for the past few years, it's been really just sheet metal shaping, and it's been great.
Also, your Instagram is fantastic. You're always posting. You're everywhere.
Thank you. I do my best. It's the best form of marketing I found. You teach people and people either learn how to do it themselves, and that's awesome, or they decide they're in over their head and they call me. That's awesome too. So
Do you get a lot of projects that have fallen off from somebody else and you pick them up?
Not necessarily falling off, but I think a lot of people want to attempt it themselves, which is awesome. You know what I mean? That's how I started. I'm always happy to help people. And some people really, when I post longer videos and they get to see the process, sometimes people are like, "Oh man, that's just not for me. That's more than I'm prepared to get into." And then I'm happy to help them out as well. So it works out great.
One of the biggest myths about the industry is the time that goes into some of these projects. Let's talk about that. So, what happens behind the scenes?
A lot of boring, tedious work. A lot of hours just sitting there with a hammer and dolly going tink, tink,
Tap,
tink,
tap, tap.
tink. Yeah, exactly. All this stuff. I think through years of television and kind of internet editing and trickery, people kind of got the false impression that this stuff happens quickly, where, it's a really slow process. No matter what tools you use, no matter what approach you take, it's not a fast process. A lot of people are shocked when I tell them like a basic motorcycle tank will often be, 30, 40 hours, like
Yeah.
just to make a motorcycle tank. And they have this thing that they can hold in their hands and they're like, no way. But that's just what it takes.
Let's get into that. So let's talk about the process of making some of the components that you do. I mean, primarily from what I've seen on your social media, you're mostly smaller components. You're not full vehicles. You're nothing like this. You're smaller components. You've componentized what you like to do. Is that the case?
No. So
No. Okay.
no, I like to do it. It's not that I dislike it, but my shop is here at my house because I run this business part time. So I don't have, a big elaborate shop. So I was kind of, looking at it in the beginning when I really got into sheet metal shaping. It's like, well, I could have a few motorcycles in here, no problem, and work around them comfortably and make tanks and components for that. Or I could have like one car and be like, sidestepping around it, trying to squeeze in. So I just kind of fell into making the smaller components. I started doing custom motorcycles and people saw I was a guy out there doing that. And I think there was kind of a void in that industry at the time. So, I just kind of became the motorcycle guy. But I like working on cars just as much. And I was just for the past few months, I've been teamed up with Evan at Speakeasy Motors in Wallkill, New York. And he had a big project on a 39 Lincoln Zephyr. I can't really get into it too much, but I was there making big custom fadeaway fenders for it, like 12-foot long fenders. And
Nice.
I enjoy doing that just as much. So metal is metal to me, but just sort of through necessity, I kind of fell into the small components to start off with. You gotta kind of cater to what you can do best, at the time.
Yeah, for sure. Are you a motorcycle guy at heart, or did this just kind of
Uh,
come organically?
Yeah, I have a history of both. I think I was a car guy from being ever since I was a kid. I've been in the cars. Nobody in my family rode motorcycles, so I wasn't really around them. But when I turned 18, I bought like my first motorcycle and first street bike, and I was just kind of hooked. So
Nice.
I have a long history of both with cars and bikes, and I love them both. Now that I have kids and jobs and everything, I don't get to ride as much as I used to. Like I always got like a little human being with me.
Yeah.
I'm never alone, so I don't
Yeah.
get to ride as much as I used to, but I still love them.
let's talk about the process of making a motorcycle tank. So if somebody calls you and says, "Hey, I want a tank made for my bike," where do you start?
So when I'm looking at design for motorcycle tanks, a lot of them, some can be simple peanut style chopper tanks, but a lot of motorcycles tanks that I get, it seems, are, Ducati based cafe racer style tanks, and they've got a lot of different design elements. A lot of them tend to have angular shapes or knee cutouts and things like that. So when I look at a design, my first thought is where am I going to put the weld seams?
Okay.
Because I always avoid weld seams on corners as much as possible. That's kind of like your weakest joint. And something that people don't think about with motorcycle tanks is, it is a tank. It's a vessel that's holding fuel, right above your lap in a hot engine. So it needs to be built durable, and they're also generally take more abuse than say like an automotive part. Motorcycles vibrate a lot more. A lot of choppers are hard mounted engines, so just sitting at a stoplight, they're shaking like crazy. So
Mhm.
I'm really aware of where I put my weld seams because I want to be able to get a good weld. I want to be able to hammer and dolly, the weld out, not only just to get the shape correct, but also that release and like tension from the weld. So weld seam placement is huge for me to make a motorcycle tanks because I want like a durable project. I don't want anyone to call me up and say like they were just on fire on the side of the road.
Yeah, that'd be the worst, wouldn't it? That would be the worst. Catskill Mountain Customs. I'm burning down on the highway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that would be a terrible sound bit for me, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah. In terms of actual construction and building this thing, like where do you start there? Do you build a buck? Do you get pictures? What do you do?
It depends. I generally like bucks because another thing I found with motorcycle tanks is unless you're doing like a chopper that's kind of real open and maybe like a Frisco style tank that sits up high, there's generally a lot of size requirements. They have to butt up to
Mm,
the seat, the handlebars need to clear it, the triple trees need to clear it. So you kind of have to hit your dimensions. Um, so when dimensions are critical, I'll build a buck that way I can make sure like, man, it fits this buck, it's going to fit on this bike.
yeah.
Um, Sometimes though, you got a little bit more space and then I can work without a buck. When you're designing a motorcycle tank, generally your first view that you're looking at is the side profile of the bike. Because I
Mm,
mean, that's kind of everything, right? You look at a
yeah.
motorcycle from a level side profile, you want to see everything flow. So generally I'll start with, a side and make sure I get that all where I want it and looking good. And then that side basically is my buck to take the patterns off of to make the other side. So the two sides will be symmetrical, and then you can fill in the top, fill in the bottom, and you've got
Mhm.
a tank
You
just
ever get
like
any
that.
you ever get any crazy requests where you're like, oh man, I can't build that. I can't get my tools in there. I can't do what you're asking. You ever get anything like that?
Uh, Crazy requests, yeah. Never that I can't do that. It's more you don't want to pay me to do that. It's
Yeah.
like with enough time, you could probably make anything.
Yeah.
But it's like, man, this is kind of out there, and it's never generally the design necessarily, the aesthetics. It's that I don't think I can make this realistically fit on with all the constraints you have because most of the time people are trying to hide all the motorcycle components, right? Like you want that clean
Mm,
look and they might not have a tail cowl to stick the battery in or something. So they're like, can I put oil on one side of the tank and the battery up underneath and something here and there? And the bike is in California and I can't ship it to you. And I'm like, dude, like, there's no way, like, there's no way you can give me enough information to make room for all this stuff. And I'm going to send it to you and it's just going to sit on the bike, like that's probably the biggest hurdle. Like the underneath the tank is probably sometimes that's where all the time is in the tunnel because getting
really?
that thing to fit. Yeah,
Wow.
sometimes on like real simple looking tanks on the outside, it's the tunnel super intricate, especially on Japanese bikes, Italian bikes. You might have like three backbones coming down, converging, carburetor tops, all kinds of things underneath there. So making sure that you have that's going to fit and hold a decent amount of fuel. You don't want to just make the tunnel a mile deep and then it holds like half a gallon of fuel. So that's always a big hurdle when making a motorcycle tank is making sure it's going to fit on the frame.
Yeah. What about material selection? What do you prefer to work with? Steel, aluminum, stainless?
Uh, Never stainless. I try to work with stainless as little as possible. I mean, except for exhausts, like stainless looks great, but shaping it is just a nightmare. It's so springy.
Yeah.
Um, Aluminum or steel, aluminum just looks nice. You know what I mean? I like working with aluminum because when it's done, even if it's something that's going to be painted, like it looks awesome. It's
Hmm.
super light. Yeah, I really like aluminum. It's not going to rust. It's not going to corrode on the inside with fuel. Like it's great. However, if you have a bike that's going to really vibrate a lot and that kind of stuff, aluminum might not be the way to go unless you can really make good rubber mounts.
What's the best grade and thickness for aluminum if you're building a tank?
Uh, I use 3003 H14 aluminum. That's the alloy I use. And generally for tanks, I'll use 80 thousandths material.
Yep.
Some tanks, depending on the shape, some tanks I can get away with 063,
Yeah.
but I find 80 thousandths is like a real nice material, especially if it's going to be polished, because in the polishing process, you're going to take some off just through all the sanding and filing and things like that. So generally I go 80 thousandths.
Nice. And 80,000 is pretty thick compared to what you're going to use for like body work or things like that on conventional vehicles, cars, right?
Yeah, yeah. The standard for bodywork is 063, 63 thousandths.
Yeah.
So that's like standard for bodywork. So 80 thousandths is a little bit thicker. It moves a little bit. It moves a lot like steel, honestly, because in steel I'm generally using 18 gauge steel. So the 80 thousandths aluminum feels very similar to the 18 gauge steel.
Yeah. Total timeline end to end on a typical tank with a couple cutouts and a backbone that's reasonable.
You know, 40 hours I say is generally kind of like the average number, someplace around there. If it's
Yeah.
polished, if it's going to be polished a little bit longer, just because polishing them out is going to probably take like 5 hours.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but 40 hours generally for like the kind of tank that you normally see me making.
Yeah. What about in terms of if you're going to polish a tank? I mean, all of the seams and all of the fitment and all of the metal finishing has to be pretty spot on, right? Like you got to be close.
Yeah, there's no
You,
hiding.
you
Yeah,
can't hide it. Yeah.
you can't hide it, and you don't want to start like just sanding out the imperfections because next thing you know, you'll have aluminum foil holding gas. Yeah, you have to really spend your time, doing a lot of handwork. Really is what it comes down to. At the
Yeah.
end, finishing all those weld seams and everything, getting any low spots brought up, and it's just time consuming, tedious work, really.
What would the industry typically charge for a gas tank, for a custom tank, something comparable to what you're making?
Who knows? There really isn't an industry. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like each one of us who do it, we have our hourly rates, and that's kind of what we go by, and that's kind of all dependent on what part of the country or world that you're in. You know what I mean? So I might be a little bit more expensive than somebody who's someplace that's not as high of a cost of living and doing business. Um, But I would say there is an industry for custom motorcycle tanks right now because I hardly know of people who do them. Evan Wilcox here in the States does a lot. Um, he's like the OG of polished aluminum tanks. Like he's been doing it longer than any.
Let let's change gears here and let's talk about fenders and fairings and various components to bikes. You're building some of those as well. I've seen some beautiful work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do. Everything. A lot of fenders, a lot of fairings. Those are generally a lot easier than tanks, so I get to do more of them.
Let's talk about the process for that. So when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I want a set of fenders for my bike," where do you start there? What does it look like?
So it's all based on fitment on the bike. So fenders, one of the most important things is wheel and tire size. Generally, if someone gives me a tire size, I can look up the specs and I know then my radius for the fender and also the width. So because everybody wants the fender to fit the tire, right? A motorcycle always looks terrible when the fender is a different radius than the
Yeah.
tire. Exactly. It's sitting way high off or it's just not right. So it always starts with those kinds of specs. How wide are the forks? How wide is the rear? Um, so fenders are pretty simple in that way. Once we get some specific dimensions, we can make it work from there. Front fairings are, I mean, could also be kind of a nightmare because again, you got your swing of your forks, you have your gauge cluster. What is it going to mount to? You know, does the person have the capability to make some sort of mount off the neck that we're going to tie it into? So front fairings can be a little bit more tricky. Um,
Yeah.
just like with cars, though, with any motorcycle part, it's always best if I can have the bike here in my shop. You know,
Mm.
I try to accommodate everyone and I ship out a lot of parts. Um, like right now, I'm working on parts for a guy in Seattle. Um, but it's always way easier if I can have the bike or at least the frame.
Yeah. Do you ever work from photos, or do you say like, no, you know what, I don't want to do photos anymore. I've done that, been down that road, no good.
I mean, yeah, I work from photos. I'll work from anything really. You know, I mean, I'm down for all the challenges, and I feel like working from photos is kind of like the essence of being a coach builder and doing that kind of work because back in the day, that's what they did. You know, they had a drawing of a car and they made it. So I
Yeah.
kind of like that stuff. It's like, you know, scaling it off photos is kind of fun. It's a cool challenge.
Do you freeform it, build a buck, or do you just kind of go by eye off the photo? What do you do?
Uh, you know, a little bit of both. I generally like a buck, at least a little bit, you know, as a guide. You know, it generally pays off in the end having something.
Yeah.
So some people think it'll be faster just to jump into free forming parts. But if it's anything complex, oftentimes the time you spend making the buck will be saved in the actual like, you know, making your patterns, making sure everything fits. So I kind of like a buck when I can.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about pattern making. So how do you prefer to make your patterns?
I generally make pretty simple paper patterns. Nothing too complicated. Mark out my strengths, my stretches, highlights. Um, generally pretty basic. The only time I do use flexible shape patterns is I find that they could be great because I think those are more of like a buck than a pattern actually, because
Okay.
they actually show volume. So if I make one side of say a motorcycle tank, it might be great to make a flexible shape pattern, then turn inside out to make the other
Yeah.
side. So I can make
Yeah.
sure, you know, they're really symmetrical. Yeah. So sometimes flexible shape patterns do work great for that. And I just use those on the car I was working on too because that was like an original design. So I made the one side of the car and then I used flexible shape patterns to make sure I was getting the right volume on the other side.
Are you talking about that on the Zephyr?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. A lot of tape.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. Tape for days.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude. Yeah. It is a lot of tape and they do take some time, but they definitely paid off in the end. It was worth it.
Yeah, for sure. I think, a comment on this, a lot of people think, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier about spending the time up front to make sure that your patterns are right and so on. Like if you look at the net time, like end to end on the job, you could do the flexible shape pattern and still be faster, even though you think like, oh, this is taking me forever, or making a buck, is taking forever. But really at the end of the job, it's how fast you can do the entire process and how good it looks, right? Not necessarily how quick can I get to the metal itself.
Yeah. 100%. You know, we're always anxious to get to the metal because that's like the fun part. But your prep, your patterns, your buck, that stuff is going to pay off like, you know, so much in the long run. It's going to make the job so much easier. If you have a good, it's like anything else. If you have a good foundation, um, everything's going to go way easier. If you kind of jump ahead, you're going to be kicking yourself in the end.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about your shop. So you work out of a shop close to your home. How big is this shop, and what have you had to do to optimize the space within it?
Yeah, so my shop is like it's a detached garage at my home. Right now it's about 900, so it's not very big. It's 30 by 30. Um, and you know, you just have to be very you can't have a lot of extra tools around. You know, you kind of streamline what you actually need. And as time goes on, as I'm like upgrading equipment, I'm generally getting rid of stuff like, you know, I haven't touched that in a while. And I probably don't need to hang around here. So
Yeah.
I've been working out of the shop now for 10 years. And now
Mhm.
I'm in the process of actually I'm waiting on my contractor to come. We're going to make the shop bigger so that way I can take in more automotive projects and that kind of stuff. So it's time. Yep.
Is there anything in your shop that you're super proud of? Where you're like, oh, this, this stand does double duty, or I've built some function into a feature in this tool, like you can tuck it away and you never see it. Is there anything in your shop you're really proud of?
No, I have,
No.
I have some, some tools that I really like, but no, I generally, some people spend a ton of time making like they make their tools and they come up with these clever ideas, and I probably could benefit from that. But I've always kind of looked at it as I have limited time, right? I do this part time. I hope to be full time in the future, part time. So for me, I feel like my time is better spent shaping metal and like learning my craft and getting better at that than building tools. So I generally like I kind of save up, like I'll work and I'll the business will save money and I'll upgrade my equipment as opposed to like spend a week or more making a tool that may or may not work so well. That's kind of the English wheel is kind of the centerpiece of my shop. I have a FJ Edwards Type E, which I believe is from like the late 50s into the 60s. So I didn't start off with that English wheel. I've only had it, 2.5, maybe 3 years. I worked on a Harbor Freight English wheel for years. And then I kind of got to the point where I felt like my skill level was getting above my equipment. And I wanted to make sure at that point that it wasn't the equipment me back. I was getting good results with the cheap English wheel. So I was like, what's the best one I can find? And, the FJ Edwards wheels are known as one of the best ever made. So I'm like, if I get that and I suck, it's definitely not the wheel, it's me. So I searched one out and I found one and I had shipped it up here. It's a logistical nightmare, but I got it here and yeah, it's great.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for being on the show. This has been so much fun. Like I can tell your tenacity and your excitement and your genuine enthusiasm for the industry. I mean, I think that the fact that you're able to do all of these beautiful pieces, out of a two-car garage, so many great things can be done out of a two-car garage. And what you're doing and your Instagram and all the stuff, your videos are really on point. They're educational and they're fantastic. And I really appreciated you being here. Where can people find out more about you?
Oh, thanks so much, man. I'm just doing my best. I always tell people I just try to do a little bit better each time. If anyone's looking for me, they can find me on Instagram. It's Catskill _ MTN _ customs.
Awesome. Well, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode.